My husband sold our dream house to his mistress for $1, but he didn't know what I had found out. The sun had barely risen when I woke up that morning, its pale light streaming through the cracks in the blinds of my bedroom. It was strange how something as simple as a room could feel so foreign after years of calling it home. The air smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets I'd tucked into drawers and closets, but even that comforting scent couldn't mask the heaviness pressing down on me. My hands trembled slightly as they rested against the cool sheets, fingers tracing patterns over the fabric like I was trying to ground myself. Something wasn't right. I'd felt it brewing beneath the surface for weeks now, a quiet unease that gnawed at my insides whenever he walked into a room or avoided meeting my eyes. It started with little things, his phone screen going dark too quickly when I entered the kitchen, late-night work calls that never seemed urgent enough to warrant his agitation afterward, and an unfamiliar perfume clinging faintly to his jacket collar. At first, I dismissed them as paranoid musings born out of exhaustion or stress. After all, we'd been married for 10 years, built this life together brick by brick, dream by dream. We weren't perfect, no couple ever is, but betrayal? That was something I thought existed only in movies or tabloids. Not here. Not us. But then came the letter, a single envelope slipped under our front door while we were both away at work. There was no return address, just my name scrawled across the front in bold black ink. Inside was a copy of legal documents detailing the sale of our house, the one we'd poured every ounce of savings into, the one where we'd painted walls until our arms ached and planted flowers in the garden until our knees were caked with dirt. The buyer's name stared back at me, Cassandra Leclerc. And the price? $1. I sat there on the floor of our living room, clutching the papers like they might disintegrate if I let go, my mind racing faster than I could process. Why would anyone sell a house worth hundreds of thousands of dollars for such a laughable amount? Who was Cassandra Leclerc? And why did her name sound so familiar? The answer hit me like a freight train moments later. Cassandra. The woman whose name I'd seen scribbled hastily in the margins of his planner last month. The same woman whose number I'd accidentally stumbled upon buried deep in his contacts list under the guise of Client C. Suddenly, everything clicked into place, the secretive texts, the hurried excuses to leave dinner early, the way he flinched whenever I mentioned renovating the master bedroom. All those pieces fell together like shards of broken glass, forming a jagged picture I didn't want to see. And yet, despite the anger bubbling inside me, what struck me most was the sheer audacity of it all. Selling our house, the symbol of everything we'd worked toward, for practically nothing, handing it over to someone else without so much as a conversation. To her. How dare he treat what we shared as disposable, something to be traded away for fleeting pleasure. My chest tightened painfully, each breath feeling shallower than the last. Betrayal doesn't come neatly wrapped in logic, it claws at you, raw and unrelenting, leaving behind scars you can't hide. When he finally came home that evening, whistling some tune I didn't recognize, I was waiting for him. Sitting cross-legged on the couch, the damning documents spread out before me like evidence in a courtroom. His smile faltered the moment he saw them, his face draining of color as realization dawned. For a brief second, guilt flickered in his eyes, but it vanished almost instantly, replaced by defensiveness. What is this? I asked, my voice eerily calm considering the storm raging within me. He hesitated, running a hand through his hair nervously. Look, I can explain. Explain what? I cut him off sharply, standing now, my hands gripping the edge of the coffee table for support. How you sold our home, the one we spent years building together, to your mistress for $1. Or maybe you'll tell me why you thought lying about it would make it okay. His jaw clenched, and for a moment, he looked like he wanted to argue, to deny it all. But then something shifted in his expression, a resignation settling over him. You don't understand, he said quietly, sinking onto the armchair opposite me. Things haven't been good between us for a long time, Sarah. You know that. That's not an excuse. I snapped, my voice cracking under the weight of emotion. This isn't just about us, it's about trust, respect, everything we promised each other when we got married. Did any of that mean anything to you? He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, he stared down at his hands, avoiding my gaze entirely. In that silence, I realized something far more devastating than his infidelity. He didn't regret it. Not really. Whatever connection he had with her, this Cassandra person, it meant more to him than whatever we once had. And that hurt worse than anything else. Days passed in a blur of sleepless nights and unanswered questions. I couldn't bring myself to confront him again, not yet. Every time I tried, the words caught in my throat, choking me with their weight. So instead, I threw myself into uncovering the truth, determined to piece together the full extent of his deception. It wasn't hard to find information about Cassandra online. She was everywhere. A successful real estate agent with a penchant for luxury properties and designer clothes, her social media profiles painted the picture of someone who thrived on attention. Photos of her posing beside sleek cars, sipping champagne at rooftop parties, and flashing dazzling smiles filled my screen. She was beautiful, yes, but also calculating. Her sharp features mirrored the precision with which she'd infiltrated my life. As I scrolled through her posts, one photo caught my eye, a candid shot of her laughing with someone in the background. Squinting closer, I froze. It was him. They stood side by side, oblivious to the camera, looking happier than I'd seen him in years. The caption read, "With my favorite client today. #dreams do come true." Beneath it, comments poured in praising their chemistry, speculating about whether they were more than just business partners. My stomach churned violently, bile rising in my throat as I closed the app. But it wasn't just her presence in his life that haunted me, it was the secrets hidden within our own home. Over the next few days, I began searching every inch of the house, driven by a desperate need to understand how deeply rooted his betrayal truly was. It started innocently enough, rifling through old receipts, checking bank statements, combing through emails. But soon, I found myself digging deeper, prying open drawers and cabinets I hadn't touched in years. That's when I discovered it, a small wooden box tucked away in the attic, buried beneath dusty photo albums and forgotten keepsakes. Inside were letters. Dozens of them, each addressed to Cassandra in his unmistakable handwriting. Some were short notes, others lengthy confessions spilling over multiple pages. As I read through them, tears streaming down my face, I realized they chronicled the entirety of their affair, from tentative beginnings to passionate declarations of love. He wrote about how trapped he felt in our marriage, how suffocated he was by routine and responsibility. He described her as his escape, his salvation. Each word felt like another knife twisting in my heart. But among the letters, there was something else, a folded-up document tucked carefully at the bottom of the box. Unfolding it, I gasped. It was a deed transfer form, dated months ago, signed not only by him but also by Cassandra herself. Only this time, the property listed wasn't our house, it was a beachfront condo in Malibu. A place neither of us had ever visited, let alone owned. Confusion swirled inside me as I stared at the paper, trying to make sense of it. Why would they buy a second property together? What purpose did it serve beyond further entrenching their relationship? The questions consumed me, pulling me deeper into a spiral of obsession. I needed answers, not just for closure but for survival. If I didn't figure out the truth, I feared I might lose myself completely. And so, armed with the knowledge I'd uncovered, I made a decision, one that would change everything. Standing outside her office building the following week, I felt a strange mix of fear and determination coursing through my veins. The sleek glass structure loomed above me, reflecting the midday sun in blinding flashes. Inside, somewhere amidst the polished floors and bustling employees, was Cassandra. Part of me wanted to turn around, to retreat back to the safety of ignorance. But the rest of me knew I couldn't, not until I faced her head-on. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside, my heels clicking softly against the marble tiles. At the reception desk, I gave her name, my voice steady despite the turmoil raging within. Within minutes, I was ushered into a private conference room, where she waited, poised and elegant in a tailored suit. Her lips curled into a smirk as she took me in, clearly amused by my intrusion. "Well, well," she drawled, leaning back in her chair. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" For a moment, I faltered, unsure of where to begin. But then I remembered the pain, the lies, the betrayal, and suddenly, the words flowed effortlessly. "You think you've won," I said, my tone icy. "But you have no idea what you're dealing with." Her smirk faltered, curiosity replacing smugness. "What are you talking about?" Instead of answering, I slid the deed transfer form across the table, watching as her expression morphed from confusion to alarm. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my voice dripping with venom. "Because I'm pretty sure selling stolen property is illegal." Her eyes widened, panic flickering in their depths. For the first time since walking in, I felt a glimmer of satisfaction. Whatever game she thought she was playing, it was far from over. Cassandra's hands trembled as she reached for the document, her perfectly manicured nails grazing the edge of the paper like it might burn her. She scanned it quickly, her lips parting in disbelief before snapping shut again. The confident facade she'd worn just moments ago was crumbling, revealing something far more fragile beneath. Her eyes darted up to meet mine, searching for any sign that I might be bluffing. But I wasn't. Not this time. "What is this supposed to mean?" she asked finally, her voice tinged with both irritation and unease. "You think waving around some random piece of paper gives you leverage? This doesn't prove anything." "Oh, but it does," I replied coolly, leaning forward slightly. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to remain composed, to let the weight of my words sink in. "This proves that you and my husband conspired to acquire property under false pretenses. Property that wasn't his to sell or transfer in the first place. And if I'm not mistaken, that constitutes fraud." Her jaw tightened, and for a fleeting second, I saw fear flicker across her face. It was subtle, a twitch of an eyebrow, a slight narrowing of her eyes, but it was there. She knew I had her cornered. Still, she wasn't about to back down without a fight. "You're grasping at straws," she shot back, though her tone lacked conviction. "Even if what you're saying is true, and I'm not admitting it is, do you really think anyone would believe you over me? A desperate housewife versus a successful businesswoman? Come on, Sarah. Be realistic." Her attempt to belittle me stung, but I refused to let it show. Instead, I smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of my lips meant to unsettle her further. "Funny you should mention being realistic," I said, pulling out my phone. With a few quick taps, I brought up the photos I'd taken earlier, screenshots of their private messages, copies of the letters he'd written to her, even bank statements showing suspicious transfers between his accounts and hers. I slid the device across the table toward her, watching as her expression shifted from skepticism to outright panic. "This isn't just hearsay," I continued, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "It's evidence. Enough to ruin both of you if it gets into the wrong hands. So tell me, Cassandra, how much is your reputation worth to you?" She stared at the screen, her fingers hovering hesitantly over the images as though afraid to touch them. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched taut, heavy with unspoken threats and simmering tension. Finally, she exhaled sharply, running a hand through her perfectly styled hair, a rare crack in her polished exterior. "Okay," she admitted begrudgingly, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "You've got me. What do you want?" The question caught me off guard, though it shouldn't have. This was the moment I'd been building toward, the culmination of everything I'd uncovered. Yet now that it was here, I found myself hesitating. What did I want? Revenge? Justice? Closure? All of those things seemed too simple, too inadequate to encompass the depth of betrayal I'd endured. But one thing was certain, I wouldn't leave this room empty-handed. "I want answers," I said firmly, meeting her gaze head-on. "Everything. From the beginning. No lies, no omissions. If you try to sugarcoat it or leave anything out, I swear I'll make sure every last detail of this ends up splashed across the news. Do we understand each other?" She nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "Fine. Ask your questions." Over the next hour, Cassandra spilled everything, or at least, as much as she thought she could get away with. According to her, the affair had started innocently enough, a chance meeting at a networking event, casual conversations that gradually turned flirtatious, late-night texts that escalated into secret rendezvous. At first, she claimed, it was just physical attraction, nothing serious. But as time went on, they grew closer, sharing confidences and dreams neither of them felt comfortable discussing with their respective partners. "He told me how unhappy he was," she explained, her voice tinged with defensiveness. "How trapped he felt in your marriage. He said you two had grown apart, that you didn't understand him anymore. I didn't plan for it to happen, it just did." I clenched my fists beneath the table, forcing myself to stay calm. Hearing her justify their relationship made my skin crawl, but I needed to hear it all, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Every word was another thread unraveling the tangled web they'd woven together. "And the house?" I pressed, my tone sharp. "Why sell it to you for practically nothing? What was the point?" She hesitated, glancing down at her hands before answering. It wasn't about the money. It was symbolic. He wanted to give me something meaningful, something that represented his commitment to leaving his old life behind. Selling the house for $1 was his way of cutting ties, with you, with the past, with everything holding him back. Her explanation hit me like a punch to the gut, leaving me breathless. Symbolic. Commitment. Cutting ties. Each word felt like a knife twisting deeper into an already gaping wound. How could he throw away everything we'd built so carelessly, so callously? Was our entire marriage really that meaningless to him? But there was still one piece of the puzzle missing, the beachfront condo. When I asked about it, Cassandra's demeanor shifted again, her earlier bravado giving way to genuine apprehension. That wasn't supposed to happen, she admitted reluctantly. He came to me one day, saying he'd found this incredible deal on a property in Malibu. Something about an estate sale, lowball offer, the usual real estate jargon. He convinced me to help him secure it, said it would be our fresh start. Only, she trailed off, biting her lip nervously. Only what? I demanded, my patience wearing thin. Only it turns out the property wasn't exactly available, she finished quietly. The original owner never signed off on the sale. We thought we'd covered our tracks, but apparently, someone noticed. There's been talk of legal action, investigations. My blood ran cold. Legal action. Investigations. Suddenly, the stakes felt impossibly high, the consequences far-reaching. If what she was saying was true, then not only had my husband betrayed me emotionally, but he'd also dragged me into a potential criminal scandal, all without my knowledge or consent. Before I could process the full implications of her confession, Cassandra leaned forward, her expression earnest yet calculating. Look, Sarah, I know none of this excuses what we did. But if you expose us, it won't just destroy us, it'll destroy you too. Think about it. Scandal, lawsuits, public humiliation. Is that really what you want? Her words lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. As much as I hated to admit it, she had a point. Going public with everything would undoubtedly bring chaos into my life, dragging me deeper into the mess they'd created. Yet staying silent felt equally unbearable, like letting them win, like condoning their actions. For the first time since discovering the truth, I realized I was standing at a crossroads. The choices before me were stark and unforgiving: seek vengeance and risk losing myself in the process, or find another way to reclaim control of my life. Neither path promised peace, but both offered a chance to rewrite the narrative, to take back the power they'd stolen from me. As I left Cassandra's office that evening, the city lights casting long shadows across the pavement, I knew one thing for certain: whatever decision I made, it wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of clarity, a quiet determination burning within me, urging me to move forward, no matter the cost. Little did I know, the hardest part was yet to come. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and endless deliberation. I replayed every conversation, every revelation, over and over in my mind, searching for the right path forward. Cassandra's warning echoed in my thoughts: scandal, lawsuits, public humiliation. She was right, exposing them would unleash chaos, not just on their lives but on mine as well. Yet silence felt like complicity, like letting them erase the years I'd invested in a marriage built on lies. But there was something else gnawing at me, something deeper than anger or betrayal. It was grief, not for the loss of him, but for the life we could have had if he'd chosen honesty instead of deceit. That realization became my anchor, grounding me when the weight of it all threatened to pull me under. I didn't owe him forgiveness, nor did I owe Cassandra anything beyond disdain. What I owed myself was clarity, closure, and the strength to rebuild what they had tried so desperately to destroy. I decided to confront him one last time, not out of hope for reconciliation, but because I needed to hear the truth from his own lips. When I arrived home late that evening, he was sitting in the living room, nursing a glass of whiskey. The dim light cast shadows across his face, accentuating the lines of exhaustion etched into his features. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "We need to talk," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. He looked up startled, then sighed heavily as though he'd been expecting this moment. "Sarah, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But can we please?" "No," I interrupted sharply, holding up a hand to stop him. "You don't get to dictate how this goes. Not anymore." His shoulders slumped, resignation washing over him. "What do you want me to say?" That I'm sorry? Because I am. More than you'll ever know. Sorry isn't enough, I shot back, my voice trembling with emotion. Do you even understand what you've done? You didn't just cheat on me, you dismantled everything we worked for. Our house, our future, our trust, it's all gone because of your selfishness. I never meant to hurt you, he whispered, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I thought I was doing what was best for both of us. You deserve better than someone who feels trapped, who can't give you the happiness you deserve. And you think running off with her is the solution? I demanded, incredulous. You think abandoning me, and dragging me into some shady real estate scheme, is somehow noble? He flinched at my words, guilt flashing across his face. It wasn't supposed to go this far. The condo, it was a mistake. A stupid, reckless decision I made in the heat of the moment. I didn't mean to put you in danger. Danger. I repeated, my voice rising. You sold our house to her for $1. You transferred property you didn't even own. And now there's talk of legal action against you, against us. How could you possibly think any of this was okay? For the first time since the conversation began, he met my gaze directly, his expression raw and vulnerable. Because I was desperate, he admitted quietly. Desperate to escape, to start over. I convinced myself that if I could just leave everything behind, I'd find peace. But all I did was make things worse, for everyone. His confession hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. Part of me wanted to scream, to lash out at him for being so reckless, so blind to the consequences of his actions. But another part, the part that still remembered the man I once loved, felt a flicker of pity. He wasn't evil, he was broken. And while that didn't excuse what he'd done, it helped me see him for what he truly was, human. When the initial storm of emotions subsided, I made my decision. I wouldn't expose them publicly, not because I feared scandal, but because I refused to let their mistakes define me. Instead, I hired a lawyer, armed with every piece of evidence I'd gathered, and filed for divorce. The terms were simple: full ownership of the house reverted to me, along with half of his assets. As for the Malibu condo, I turned the documents over to the authorities, ensuring that justice would be served without dragging my name further into the mess. Cassandra disappeared from our lives almost immediately after that meeting in her office. Rumors swirled about her involvement in the fraudulent deal, and within weeks, her polished reputation crumbled beneath the scrutiny of investigators. Whether she faced legal consequences, I never bothered to find out. Her fate no longer mattered to me. As for him, we parted ways with a mix of sorrow and relief. There were no dramatic arguments, no tearful apologies. Just a quiet acknowledgement that our story had reached its end. On the day the papers were finalized, I stood outside the house we'd once called home, feeling neither joy nor sadness, just an overwhelming sense of freedom. In the months that followed, I poured my energy into rebuilding my life. I renovated the house, transforming it into a space that reflected who I was now, not who I used to be. I reconnected with old friends, pursued hobbies I'd neglected during the years spent tending to a failing marriage, and slowly rediscovered the woman I'd lost somewhere along the way. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and crimson, I realized something profound. Betrayal doesn't define you unless you let it. Yes, he had taken pieces of my life I could never get back, but he hadn't taken me. I was still here, stronger and wiser than before, ready to embrace whatever came next. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled, not out of bitterness or triumph, but out of hope. Because sometimes, endings aren't really endings at all. They're beginnings in disguise.